everybody. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. Please let me know if the audio quality is good on YouTube and we can get started. Let's start with the Tesla stock is up 5%. Overall markets are up about 1% Dow Jones, 1.7% NASDAQ, 1.2% S&P 500, and Russell 2000 for a couple days in a row now popping up in the morning, but then drifting down. So some people are really excited about small cap companies being undervalued relative to S&P 500, but the early gains in Russell 2000 are just not holding up. Let's start with this article from just a snippet of the article from Reuters on the markets. Wall Street's main indices rose on Friday with the S&P 500 Dow on track to log their biggest weekly gains since November, as investors anticipate a wave of policy changes under the incoming Trump administration. Biggest weekly gain since November. 10 of the 11 S&P 500 sectors rose, with consumer discretionary leading gains by a 1.9% rise. Technology stocks rose 1.8%, bouncing back from the previous session's declines. Nvidia gained 3.4%, and Broadcom rose 3% after Barclays raised its price targets on the stocks. And the chip index up 2.6%. Intel jumped 8.2% on speculations of a takeover. Better than expected earnings from major banks and signs that inflation is cooling have prompted risk-taking on Wall Street this week, putting the benchmark S&P 500 and the blue chip Dow on track for their steepest weekly rises since the U.S. election week. The S&P 500 banking index and regional banks have outperformed the main indices this week, logging advances of about 6.2% and 7.1% respectively. So the banking sector is doing great, mostly on the back of lower than expected inflation, and but primarily the deregulation expectations with the incoming Trump administration. Also aiding the risk sentiment, the yield on the 10-year benchmark note is on track for its biggest weekly drop since late November. President-elect Donald Trump is expected to take over the White House on Monday, and investors will be on edge for any insights into his plans on tax cuts, tariffs, regulations, and immigration at his inauguration speech that analysts widely expect could boost the economy. It'll be easier for him to initiate his tax and regulatory programs versus tariff programs because it invites retaliation. There's some inflation and fear around that, said Scott Welsh, Chief Investment Officer at Certurity. Tesla time, how are you?
Oh, hey, good. How's things?
Things are fine. Mid-January, how are you feeling about Tesla stock?
Oh, good. I'm
Yeah.
back in the truck. Truck is backed up and fully loaded.
Yeah. Okay. What are your expectations?
You mean price wise or just generally? I mean, I'm long term to 5, 10 years. So I mean, price wise, I think will double within a year or so. A year to 2 years for sure, conservatively. You know what I think, Yaman? I think that it is the safest Mag 7 stock with the most upside. But I actually came today to um, point to put forth a question.
Well, let me ask you first.
Sure.
Why do you think Tesla is the safest stocks despite its highest price to free cash flow ratio?
Because I think it's got so many lines of business that have so much upside. And I think, as you know, its technological advantages in so many of those lines so far outpaces the competitors. I mean, it seems like I was losing faith at the time of V11 version 11, but if they if anywhere near the expected timeline comes to fruition on full self-driving and or the robot, and it seems like those accelerated in the last couple of months.
Okay, so you're happy with the FSD progress, and you believe some of these initiatives that Tesla is doing with high potential will really benefit the bottom line in the future. Do you have a timeline? So, for example, let's say Optimus. What are your expectations on Optimus? Actually, you know what? Why don't we get to your question first?
Okay, you can decide whether you want to work on this question now or we can do it some other time. But what I've been wondering for a long time is I've been following Comma AI for the last 5 or 6 years. I ran a trial. A friend of mine bought the Comma AI on my recommendation, and we tried it out. It was super rough. 5 6 years ago wasn't worth the purchase. But at that time, George Hotz was saying that Comma AI would be 1 to 2 years behind full self driving when Tesla got full self driving. And I always wondered why that was because, they obviously don't have anywhere near the data collection going on. And so now, if you're following George Hotz, he's now saying that he's 2 years behind Tesla, still a tremendous accomplishment. But I just don't see how, I'm not the technologist, I'm not an engineer, but I wonder how a comma AI catches up with a Tesla without the data collection.
I guess one way that would happen is if you don't need billions of miles to develop something like FSD, like DeepSeek, for example, out of China, was able to replicate what ChatGPT has with less powerful GPUs and a fraction of the cost. So maybe something like this is possible. I mean, I think even Elon said by 2030 FSD is going to be something like GPS, where everybody's going to have it. And it's going to be
Yeah,
very cheap.
yeah, I think you did.
Yeah, but you disagree. I guess you believe FSD will be a competitive advantage for Tesla.
Well, I mean, I certainly think it'll be a competitive advantage for a couple of years, and then you also have the physical challenges of you need to incorporate it into other manufacturing production lines of other brands. So, there's some timeline, you know, built-in friction there. But no, I mean the way technology goes, you never know. That I don't expect it to be. I don't by any means expect it to be a forever advantage, but definitely a couple of years.
Okay. And so you think Tesla will have FSD and others won't for a few years, or a couple of years. And yeah, that's
Um,
interesting. Go ahead.
yeah, I mean a couple of years is not a long time, right? But
Yeah,
they will. But that head start advantage will be super valuable, especially with robotaxi out.
yeah. So when do you expect robotaxi rides to start?
I'm down here in Lower Manhattan. I'm ready now, but I don't know. I mean, within a year or two, right? Are robotaxi rides projected in California and Texas for in 2025?
Yeah, I think they said FSD unsupervised. I'm guessing it's probably about the same thing.
Yeah,
People say some. I think Tesla say Q2. Some people say end of the year. Some people say later. There's a wide range of views.
it's so close, and I'm a believer at this point, but it's so hard to imagine it actually happening too. But and there are times when I still ask myself, is it actually a solvable problem? Just to challenge myself, right, and to see the conservative side. But
Do you use it?
no, I don't use it because I'm down here by Wall Street, so I don't, I don't use it down here. But I watch the videos and they're unbelievable. I mean, you could see the progress. It's D13 is really something. But I don't know. And if it's a solvable problem, which I think more likely than not it is, I think it'll happen within a year or two.
Okay. So when you say robotaxi will happen in a year or two, I mean, I'm not really interested in a few robotaxis in a certain, level four type of real fence area. But when do you think there going to be nationwide adoption of Tesla robotaxis? So
Um,
when do you think we'll see tens of thousands of Tesla robotaxis?
no idea because it depends if the legislation is federal or local. If it's local, it'll take a super long time relatively to if it's federal. But I think with this administration, it'll probably be federal rules. I don't know, and I don't worry about that much. I worry about I worry about that it's a fully solvable problem with a low enough accident rate. I don't really worry about regulation and when it happens. I'm a long term hold, and I sit on it as long as the thesis doesn't change. I don't sweat those details honestly.
Okay.
So you
But
got to leave that to the engineers.
you say robotaxis will happen in a year or two. So I'm not trying to understand what that exactly means.
Yeah, I sort of regretted saying that when it was coming out of my mouth. I'm not an engineer. I don't know. I can't really speak to the timeline, but
Okay. So when you say it's time to back up the truck, and you back up the truck to buy Tesla shares and locked and loaded, you said at the beginning, what does that mean? Like, what are you basing that on? If it's not robotaxis, if it's not, and you don't use FSD, you said, so what is it based on?
you know, I look at the technical charts relative to other stuff, and my risk tolerance and my ability to hold it, and I'm able to hold it, so I'm gonna hold it. I haven't done this, DCF. I haven't looked at DCF models in a while. I'm a long term hold, so on the day to day cash flows and stuff like that, I'm not the best person, or on the engineering, I'm not the best person to speak to on that. But I just think the company has a long way to go. I think they're going to be. I don't think they're finished innovating, and on that basis, is the crux of your questioning that you think it's overvalued now, and you think it's we're going to 200 or lower?
No, I'm not making any claims. I'm just kind of trying to understand what you're saying, but it just sounds a lot of big statements. I'm sorry. I have to move on.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. All right. In the last week, Apple is down 2.8%. Apple has been coming down very substantially. Warren Buffett sold most of his investments as of September 30th. In the last month or so, Apple is down about 13% from the top. 34 PE ratio. Interesting. Chicago Fed President Beth Hammack said inflation remains a problem as recent data has pointed to a resilient economy. According to data compiled by LSEG, traders are expecting the central bank to leave interest rates on hold at its meeting later this month and see the first cut coming in July. They had all but priced out any rate cuts for 2025 earlier in the week. On the data front, single family home building increased solidly in December. The housing index rose 0.7%. Social media firms such as Meta gained 0.6% and Snap lost 1.6% after the Supreme Court ruled against TikTok's challenge law that would force its app's sale or ban in the US. SLB gained 7.2% after the oilfield services provider beat estimates for fourth quarter profit. Truist Financial rose 4.4% after reporting a rise in fourth quarter profit as it earned more in interest payments. JB Hunt lost 7.1% after the trucking firm missed street estimates for fourth quarter profit. Interesting. Advancing issues outnumbered decliners by 3.13 to 1 ratio on the NYSE and by 1.81 to 1 ratio on NASDAQ. The S&P 500 posted 21 new 52-week highs and no new lows, while the NASDAQ composite recorded 59 new highs and 49 new lows. All right. Let's look at comments from Fed's Hammock. Federal Reserve Bank Cleveland President Beth Hammock said in an interview published in the Wall Street Journal on Friday that inflation remained a problem. We still have an inflation problem. We still have a rate of change problem that we need to address, Hammock told the journal. Beth Hammock is the president and chief executive officer of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, one of 12 regional banks. Cleveland Fed President Beth Hammock opposed the Fed's decision to lower interest rates at its most recent meeting. The Fed has recently promoted several officials with the Wall Street background to its senior ranks, including Beth Hammock, the former Goldman Sachs treasurer, who now leads the Cleveland Fed. Hammock dissented from the Fed's decision to cut interest rates at its December meeting, arguing that inflation remains a problem. The recent appointments reflect a shift in the Fed's attitude toward Wall Street as the central bank seeks to stay on top of how its policies are transmitted to the wider economy. When she was selected last year to lead the Fed Reserve Bank of Cleveland, one of her former colleagues on Wall Street predicted she would waste little time in leaving her stamp on monetary policy. The former Goldman Sachs treasurer opposed the Fed's decision to lower interest rates at its most recent meeting, and just her third at the central bank. Interesting. Oil prices are down slightly to $77. Natural gas prices plunged today 7% to just below $4. Yields, 10-year treasury yield is at 4.61. We have a couple of big calls on this. One of the people I follow under my macro account, Bill, says this is just the beginning of the fall in yields at the longer end. And he posted a picture of the 10-year treasury. And on the other hand, Jeff Gunlock says this is just a temporary dip. The structural reasons why the yields are surging will continue with the Trump administration. So we'll see who's right. Nick Timmeros posts tariff tensions in the Trump world. Strongly protectionist members of the incoming administration, such as Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy Stephen Miller, have argued for a more aggressive, universal approach that would see tariffs applied to virtually all imports. More traditional economic advisors, such as Treasury Secretary designate Scott Bessent and Kevin Hassett, National Economic Council Director, are advocating behind closed doors for a more targeted approach, either by exempting certain sectors or by applying tariffs gradually over time, according to the people. Those advisors argue the across the board approach risks boosting inflation and will do little to relocate manufacturing to the US. Interesting. Scott Bessent said yesterday China is the most imbalanced economy in the history of the world. They are in a severe recession depression. They may have negative 4% disinflation. I guess he meant deflation, but that's interesting. Former Fed governor and potential future chair Kevin Warsh says tariffs shouldn't contribute to higher inflation and won't require a Fed policy response. It isn't the Fed's job to interfere with price setting in a market economy. Warsh also says this economy could have supported the higher short term interest rates that prevailed before the recent cuts, and the Fed should shrink its balance sheet further, called a practical monetarism to restore Fed credibility. In an opinion piece on the Wall Street Journal. We can read that in a little bit, but I want to also talk about this Waller comments. Waller tells CNBC rate cuts are possible in the next few months. I actually watched the interview and he talked about if the data continues to come in favorable, then rate cuts are possible, which really isn't that new information. He notes the one thing that's interesting is Waller is historically hawkish governor. He notes the December CPI suggests PCE will come in at or close to the Fed's target for the sixth time in the last 8 months. If inflation continues on this path through the beginning of 2025, it's reasonable to think that possibly rate cuts could happen in the first half of the year. Waller also said monetary policy is restrictive in exactly the ways we would think it would be. The labor market is solid, it's not booming, it's not falling. So an increased confidence across the markets of a Goldilocks scenario. There's an article on the Retail Wire about Cybertruck demand. Let's read that next. Elon Musk's vision of the Tesla Cybertruck driving 1 million reservations may have fallen short of its mark by a substantial margin, at least in the US. According to Automotive News, Tesla is now offering discounts on the iconic, in whichever direction one perceives it to be, Cybertruck model only over a year after it hit showroom floors. Cybertruck discounts run anywhere from $1,600 to $2,600 as sales slow. Automotive News indicated that the new discounts range from $1,600 as applied to newer 2024 models to $2,630 for demo vehicles. Despite having seen a flurry of premium pricing as soon as it became available to the general public, Cybertruck sales have stalled in the interim, falling far short of the claimed reservation pace set by Musk. According to data from Kelley Blue Book, Tesla moved around 39,000 Cybertrucks in the US over the course of 2024. Reinforcing this data further, Automotive News pulled S&P Global Mobility figures that suggested the model had seen 35,000 reservations nationwide between November 2023 and November 2024. Interesting. Regardless of the source, some analysts were critical of the vehicle sales numbers versus those bolstered by Tesla representatives and backers. Automotive News quoted two industry experts on the subject of Cybertruck's recent fortunes. Quote, I think the Cybertruck can be officially considered a flop now, said Carl Brower, executive analyst at IC Cars. Remember, this was going to be the Tesla's F-150, the new benchmark, foundational vehicle for the Tesla brand to keep it super powerful, super profitable, and high volume. I think the initial fanware, excitement, and hype for the Cybertruck has quickly evaporated. Robbie, the graph manager of product insights at Auto Pacific, said, I've seen way more F-150 Lightning and R1T owners actually using their trucks for work or play rather than showboating around town with tacky aftermarket wraps. Even with the headwinds facing Tesla Cybertruck, it did manage to nab top spot among its peers on the EV pickup truck sales chart, edging out competitors such as Ford's F-150 Lightning and Rivian's R1T pickup. The former is estimated to have sold about 33,000 vehicles, according to the Cox Automotive data, while the latter moved around 11,000 units. While the car drew a great deal of criticism over the level of hype afforded to the model, its undeniably unique look, and the provocative personality of Tesla's Musk, many onlookers pointed to its price point as one point of relative failure. Despite Musk having initially mentioned a base MSRP around $40,000, limited run early adopter sales range around six-figure price points to now about $80,000. There are no plans to approach the $40,000 trim for the model, according to Automotive News. I think it's too early to say. Too early to say if Cybertruck is a flop or not. Let's see if Meta wants to come up and chat about FSD or anything else. Hey man, how's it going? Mhm. And architecture you're excited about.
Yeah,
Why is this one important?
it's one of the first architectures that's not completely veering away from the way transformers are built, but it is changing the layers in such a way that it adds long-term memory. Everything else has always been focused on short-term memory, and it's promising because you can see in the paper this has already been used for things like genetic algorithm detection and various other things. And if you read the paper, you can kind of see how all the things that came out of alpha series models recently have been tested against this paper. So coming from the same organization, you can kind of see like, oh, this might be how a lot of that is being done. And it can allow 2 million token windows, largely because of the way tokenization is being done. But it's a cool concept because attention is all you need applied, removing telling the algorithm how to do things at the attentive layer, or where the connections occur between neurons. And this is now bringing that same methodology to tokenization, which is like the inputs, and also to gating, and also to the layers. So it's it's more of an expansion of the same thing, whereas a lot of other approaches like Mamba are a departure from the lessons learned with transformers.
Do you think this will be more impactful for FSD or Optimus?
Maybe Optimus because FSD is pretty much there already. But if FSD was to get stuck and they needed something that pushed them further with the existing hardware, this would be the kind of thing that would.
Mhm.
It could be very impactful for FSD for severe edge cases, or like you need longer memory and you need to know what to remember. The hard part is, I think I described this in the past, right? The approach today with transformers is you give the model a scratch pad and let it scribble down stuff on the scratch pad, but you don't really know how to train and test. And so it gets really challenging how you get the scratch pad to be used well. The Titan framework actually describes a mathematical approach for how you decide what goes on the scratch pad. And so, because it's a mathematical approach, you can actually say, is it doing it correct or incorrect? They kind of expand on the PPO paper, which says, you can use time decay and you can use how much something reward contributed to something as a reward mechanism. Titans introduce a third mechanism, which is to say things that are surprising should be more memorable. Things that are surprising but occur more often, like we learn the lesson a lot, can actually be forgotten. So when you combine those two things, it's actually how the T cells in the body work to fight diseases. And that might also be how our brain decides what to remember and what not to remember.
How does this help FSD and how does it help Optimus? And when you say um, extending memory at inference time without exploding the costs of memory and compute, um, the architecture enables models to find and store during inference small bits of information that are important in long sequences.
I'll give you a concrete example if you want.
Hmm.
Let's say you're going on a drive and you see something surprising, like uh, there's a deer in the road. It's not that you've never seen it before, but it is surprising when you see a deer. Maybe it's on the side of the road. How you then drive for the next few minutes, knowing that there's deer around, or in the area that you're in, there are deer around, or maybe you just saw a sign that says "Be careful, deer." How that changes your thinking might be longer than a simple context window. So whether it was a 5-second context window or now the expanded like 20, 30-second windows, you might need to actually remember that there are deer around for like the next hour. You might actually want to remember that there are deer around in such geography where that sign exists, even when you're going back. So that contextual memory doesn't require federated learning, which is the hard part from debugging, but it just requires the model to know If you see something surprising or something rare, then you should allow the fact that that exists to be kept on your scratch pad, your long-term memory, and the existence of that item on your scratch pad will allow you to shift how different neurons are weighted in your existing neural net. So you're more likely to drive a little slower around the corners if there's deer than if there aren't deer.
Hmm. Um, okay. So when was this paper published, and what's the paper called, so I can read it later?
It has a long name. Give me a moment. It's
That's okay.
the
Titans learning to memorize at test time. Is that what it is?
yes, that's it.
Okay.
It was,
Submitted
I believe
December
it
31.
came out on New Year's Eve.
Yeah. Um, so this is a paper now. How long before this makes its way into FSD and Optimus inference, do you think?
I'm bad at predictions, man. I don't know that I can tell you. I can tell you that the chinchilla paper, we talked about it a year and a half before everybody else started talking about it. So let's say optimistically people are better about it, and instead of it being 18 months, it's 9 months.
Yeah, so let's say this makes it way into by next year. But how, like, when do you think this will increase performance of FSD? And let's say percentage of drives completed without a critical intervention.
I think this would justify a version bump from 12 to 13, and I would expect to see 12 to remain as it is while they squeeze out everything they can on performance on hardware 4,
You mean
especially the
version 13 to version 14, right?
I know FSD 12 to 13. I'm sorry, 13 to 14. I'm totally
Right.
mistaken. You're right. Yeah, I'm still
Yeah, that's okay.
processing. Yeah, so 13 would stay where it is. They would continue to squeeze out the hardware optimizations on hardware 4. At some point, you say, okay, now in certain regions, in certain cities, it's performing well. In certain circumstances, like say a fire breaks out in a whole city, it doesn't know what to do. Those exceptional circumstances we can't really address. So people still need to have personal vehicles. It's good for daily stuff, but it's maybe not good during certain weird situations, surprising events, rain, infrequent events. So those edge cases, you'll need V14. So I'm not saying that this is needed to get to robotaxi. I just want to make that clear. But I do see this as something that helps you get past human level driving.
So does this replace transformers altogether, or is this complementary?
Consider an extension of Transformers. The middle of it is still Transformers. The thing that changes is everything around the middle.
Okay.
By changing everything around the middle, it basically means that you can have smaller models do the same thing. Um, so it's playing with compute. But what all the other models did is they try to actually mess with the internals, the thing that Transformers solved, which is super stupid, right? It's like, oh, for a very long time, everybody's been trying to solve this problem, and somebody solved it very, very well. Now I'm going to go and tinker with that exact spot. That seems what the approach was from every other researcher in the past.
Yeah.
Like when you hear people talk about memory in the past, the way they were addressing memory was by changing the multi-attention head, which is the core thing that Transformers published. And this one says, nah, leave that alone. Instead, why don't we focus on the inputs going into the transformer? Why don't we focus on additive ways to prepare inputs that go into the transformer, but leave the transformer alone?
So do you think this will be less transformative than attention is all you need then?
No, I think this will be, in my personal opinion, I think this will be as transformative as Chinchilla was and Transformers was. And maybe you don't see them both as the same transformative level, but I'm very excited about this paper. That's why in December when you asked me about it, I was like a little coy.
Yeah. Um, do you think your optimism bias is at play here?
100%. Like,
Hmm.
this is more in my realm of knowledge. How about this? Do you see how this relates to compression very, very well? Like you can really shrink your models dramatically. So this might be the thing that gets harder with theory.
When you say dramatically, is there a number?
Let's say taking something that's quadratic and making it linear.
Mm.
It's more about scalability, so it's less about size, if you will.
Taking something quadratic and making it linear, does that mean a 10,000x smaller with same performance?
It's relative to how many layers they have. So let's say they had 100 layers, it'd be like 10x better.
Okay. And if there are 1,000 layers, then what?
Uh, Whatever base we want to use, maybe 100x better.
Is this explained in the paper?
It is, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll read the paper and see. We can have a deeper discussion on this after I read the paper.
I will say this. You remember how much I was excited about Chinchilla and I came with like slides and everything? This is
Mhm.
that level. And I have not been this excited about a paper in a very long time.
Okay. So let's say, for example, um, Tesla FSD, according to FSD Tracker, is now at 97% of trips completed without a critical intervention. Where do you think that will be in a year, 2 years, 3 years?
I think with 13 itself, again, I think the problem with FST trackers is global or it's the entirety of the United States. If we're talking about the entirety of the United States, they will continue to hit walls, but I would imagine in areas where it does well, people will drive more with it, and in areas where it doesn't do well, people will drive less with it. Therefore, it will bias the number going up, even without improvement in theory. So if they were to start collecting more sample data in a large amount, I could see it shift to 4 or 5 nines within 13.
Okay. Well, I'm really just interested in nationwide data. So,
Yeah, I'm saying that nationwide.
okay. So nationwide, we'll see 459s on V13.
Let's say you got to 6 or 7 nines in California. The vast majority of your data on the tracker will suddenly be California data. In theory, if it was sampling accurately across the United States, because the majority of the driving will happen in areas where it's working well.
Okay. Now, I understand your reasoning and the math behind that and the kind of the weighting changing as FSD improves in one area or another. But given that, let's assume that is true. You're expecting nationwide data to show 3 to 4 nines in a year, basically, on V13.
Keeping in mind I have a severe optimism bias. Yes,
Okay. Do you want to do a copy bet?
I'm off the coffee bets. I think it just raises intensity for no reason.
Okay.
But we can have a gentleman's. You can write it down, and we can revisit it as like a point of place to learn from.
FSD will hit 3 to 4 nines, i.e., 99.9% of trips completed without a critical intervention nationwide
As I
with
think of, oh,
a heavy weight of most trips in California and Texas on FSD 13 by Q1 2026. Is that fair?
yeah, that's fair. Yeah, because the only downside to this is if it gets really good in California and Texas, people just stop using the tracker because they feel like it's done. At which
Okay.
point I'll just default to claiming I was right. If it happens where California and Texas have robo taxis and people are using it a lot, that's a different scenario in my opinion. At that point, it doesn't really matter because that won't be a priority for them to get nationwide at that point.
Um, do you think this will lead to FSD unsupervised, meaning no tracking of your eyes in California and Texas?
I think at least one of them by the end of the year. Yeah, probably one city at least. The thing is, I went to CES and I saw the new Waymos. I don't know if you've seen this, but there are actually three Waymo cars now, not just one.
Hmm.
I was surprised. So I knew about the Zeekr, but I didn't know that they're doing one with Hyundai as well. And Hyundai knows how to make cars. And the
Hmm.
Hyundai one looks exactly like a Jaguar I-Pace. You can literally
Hmm.
look at it and be like, oh, Jaguar fucked up and didn't make the order. So Hyundai
Right.
has now been given the order.
Right.
I
Did you know
asked one
that
of the
they add their?
representatives,
Yeah, go ahead.
okay. I asked one of the representatives there, and they basically said the reason why they have the steering wheel is because you can't put the cars on the road without steering wheels, which I thought was strange because I've seen Zooks around without it. So I'm not
Hmm.
quite sure why they have a steering wheel still.
Yeah, that's what their co-CEO said in a recent interview too, that you can't produce cars without a steering wheel at this time.
Zooks does it. Maybe it's because they go under a certain mileage. I think maybe the golf cart limitation or something like that. I know there was a law around that, so maybe that's what they're doing.
Hmm.
But
Right.
Zooks definitely, I've seen them in San Francisco. No driver, no steering wheel, driving around.
Really?
Yeah, Zooks is in Vegas and in San Francisco now.
And they're
I don't know
doing
if it's
commercial
open.
rides.
I don't know if they're doing commercial rides. I've seen them on the road with nobody in them driving around.
Mm.
But in Vegas, they do commercial rides.
With nobody around or nobody in them, or you mean like
Uh,
no driver?
there's no driver. Okay, don't quote me on this. It may not be that they charge the customer, but they do definitely have people using it.
Okay, Zook's testing in SF and Vegas. I'll look into this more.
The San Francisco Zooks one, I just physically saw it myself, so that one I know for sure. The Vegas one, I've seen them around as well. So like,
You should try to get in one, see what happens.
I need to figure out how, but yeah, it's on my list of things to try.
Hmm.
Also, I'm only gonna get in it after I know how it works. I'm not exactly like jumping up and down to put my life. I never got in a cruise, for example, because I never trusted that shit.
Really?
You got in a cruise. I'm
Yeah,
never getting
a
in one
bunch
of
of
those
times.
death traps. I'm not getting in
Yeah,
one of those.
yeah, it was kind of crazy. Looking back on it, I'm like, probably shouldn't have done this.
I kept telling you guys, like when you would say like cruises like Waymo, I was like, they are not from an engineering
Hmm.
standpoint. These are not the same thing. Zooks is different. I will say that. Like I think the narrative is going to start shifting around Amazon and their tech prowess soon. If Infurion takes off, watch out for Nvidia.
Hmm. If Interion takes off, watch out for Nvidia. What do you mean by that?
Uh, Nvidia might crash, right? Like one of their bigger customers is probably Amazon. Imagine
Hmm.
if Amazon stops buying Nvidia chips because they have enough. Amazon has enough Nvidia chips, and they have Infurion, and they start pushing all their cloud customers over to Infurion. Then the only buyer will be left. That's a big cloud provider. Will be Microsoft and Elon's companies.
Hmm.
Another
Yeah.
surprising one at CES, by the way, is John Deere. I think people shouldn't sleep on John Deere. This is not financial advice. I want to make it very, very clear. Like, just
Hmm.
anytime I talk, I'm just talking because I'm an engineer interested in these things. But yeah, John Deere was a very interesting company. I did speak to them for a little while. They're based out of the Bay Area, even though they are like not, they're from like the Midwest. They opened a Bay Area office by acquiring a company there in Santa Clara that focuses on autonomy. And it's a really interesting use case because they don't have to actually go get the highest talent or anything. They actually have a very low risk testing zone with high profit margins already kind of built in. So what they're doing right now is they'll have tractors on the road, sorry, on the farm. If the tractor sees anything concerning, it just stops. They're not at high speeds. They're moving pretty slow. They can just stop without any risk. there's not cross traffic or anything, and then the farmer gets a little ping on their phone, and they can look at what the cameras say, and they can say proceed or don't proceed. That data then gets recorded, and they can aggregate that all up into the cloud, and then eventually you can have somebody remotely monitoring tons of farms, and then you can eventually have that train models, and now you don't even need the people to know.
Mhm.
And they're also using gas. They're not just stuck on electric.
Um, how do you think the Titans paper impacts NVIDIA?
NVIDIA may design custom ASICs to accommodate for Titans. Currently, you could use existing ASICs for it, but they're not optimized for it, right? They're optimized for transformers. Um, it gives them a second wind in the sense that they could be like, oh, but these chips are actually super specialized for that. But the thing about it is, the more they become specialized to one architecture, the less NVIDIA has a specialty to offer. For them, it would be beneficial to say, well, sometimes you want Transformers, sometimes you want Mamba, sometimes you want Titans. You don't really know what you're going to want. Therefore, use our chips because they're versatile. And that continues to allow them to market.
Yeah. Yeah, my NVIDIA short has been okay. It's not the most profitable, but it's not doing too bad either. But there's just so many people I respect that are excited about this company that makes me second guess myself.
Yeah,
But
I am in the same boat about crypto and NVIDIA, and I can't see myself out of it.
Mhm. but and the people who kind of repeat the things I say about NVIDIA, the number of people have been increasing as well. So both sides are kind of sticking to their. I mean, one side is growing, the other side is kind of sticking to their guns, and really interesting because these are all very smart people. They're all very smart people.
I think it takes a large event for NVIDIA to see any kind of correction, right? Like that's the problem. It it could continue to grow, grow, grow. It could get out of hand pretty easily, well before the market ever goes, oh crap, Amazon has a competitive offering.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
I
I mean,
mean,
the technology
now Amazon
people,
can claim their
the,
founder has landed a rocket too. So maybe they can raise more funds.
the technology people seem very excited about NVIDIA, and finance people seem skeptical of NVIDIA. So that's
Well, I
most.
guess
I mean,
I'm
you're
happy to be the exception.
right. You are the exception, exactly. But you're not shorting NVIDIA.
I
But I
sold covered
guess
calls a while ago, but they've expired. I
right.
might do
So
it again.
you're kind of on the sidelines now, and covered calls is a little different, obviously, than shorting. Like shorting is more, um,
Aggressive.
high confidence kind of bet. Covered call is kind of a bit more safer bet, I guess.
Yeah, I
A
was
bit
like,
of
it'll at
lower
least be
potential.
flat. Like, I don't think
Right.
it's gonna go up as much as people think it's gonna go up.
Yeah. Um, yeah. And I haven't really decided what to do with this one. I mean, I'm
T-
short,
I think
but
I used the wrong word. It wasn't a covered call, it was a call spread. I sold a call spread.
oh, okay,
I
gotcha.
never owned the stock. I sold a call spread.
Hmm.
That's
I
not
mean,
true.
is
I've
that
owned
is
the
that
stock
that
in the past, and I sold all the
right?
stock at one point, and then I sold it at call spread.
Hmm. I mean, I guess the only difference is that um, whether you own the stock or using something else to finance the sale of the higher strike call. It's
The
not that different
downside,
from each
the
other.
downside is quite different, right? Like if you own the stock, the downside could be severe. Like it could fall a lot faster than your premium you collect versus a call spread. You're limiting your downside and your upside, so you know exactly what you're getting into.
Hmm.
And if it's flat, you don't really benefit from many trades, except I guess you benefit in both of these situations.
Hmm.
I got to get going. Anyway, I thought I would just share so you can
Yeah.
read about the paper. All right, have
Thank
a
you.
good
I
one.
will. All right. Take care. All right. That's 1 hour. I want to limit these to 1 hour. So that's it. Thank you very much. And I'll chat with you all next time. Take care.